Look at this absolutely terrible camera setup I've tried to make this damn profile. Hey guys, today I'm going to show you my $7,000 blind second dogmatic invoke shit all deck. Check it out. So I used it to take down 5 local tournaments undefeated. My total record I think was 24 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. So I'll show off my deck here. So I played 3 Alistair, 3 Meltdown, 3 Invocations, and 1 Terraforming. So I should say the entire deck's maxed except for 1 Starlight Ecclesia, which is in the mail, and I also cannot stand Collector Rare. So I'll throw that in there in case anyone wants to say in the comments, oh, you're not playing Collector Rare or Artemis. Yeah, I don't care. They're ugly. Anyway, for Shaddolls, played a relatively small Shaddol engine. I was blending second, so I only played the beast that advances your own game state without the other Shaddolls, and the Dragon and Ariel because they interact with your opponent. And then, of course, 3 Shaddol Fusion and 1 Schism. But the game plan of this deck is essentially just to go second, break the board, and set up either a Winda or a Mekaba and just hope they can't like come back from it. Next, the Dogmatic engine played 1 Fleur, 1 Ecclesia. This again, it's on the way in the mail. I played 3 Nadir Servant. These cards help advance your own game state, which is something the deck sort of lacks without this 3rd engine in the deck. So yeah, these cards are good. Then consistency cards, played 3 Desires, 1 Upstart, 2 Triple Tactics Talents, and 2 Phantasme. I don't consider Phantasme a hand trap. It's more like it's a consistency booster card. Like, it doesn't act the way other hand traps do, which is sort of to trade with your opponent in the hopes that they don't make a board that you can't get through. So yeah, I consider Phantasme like a duality that gives you a monster on board. Like, it's really good, especially now in this current format. I should mention that 2 of my local wins were with a go first version of this deck in the last format. In the last format, you had to go first because of VFD. And you had to play hand traps because of VFD. Currently, there's no deck that like hand loops you, FDKs you, makes a lingering effect that has no consistent out to. So currently you can blind second just fine, and you can break almost any board, which is why this deck is so good. For counter cards, I played 3 Forbidden Droplet. This card's nuts. I love it, especially because one of the cards you'll lose quite heavily to is Dweller. Having an out to Dweller in a card that you can actually realistically play is really nice. 3 Dark Ruler, Droplet without the cost, it's quite nice. And of course, for the back row, play 3 Lightning Storm and 1 Pancratops. So that's it for the main deck. 40 cards. Try to keep it as consistent as possible. I'll note down some changes I've made after we got into the new current format, where the format has sort of evolved a little bit. So I'll link some of my changes in the comments. Then for the extra deck, played 1 Construct, 2 Apkalone, 2 Winda, 2 Mekaba, 1 Orgoidius, 1 Ragin, 1 Caliga, 1 Starving Venom, 1 Entus, 1 Anaconda, 1 Gravity Controller, and 1 Artemis. Pretty standard, don't think it needs any explanation. Finally for the side deck, and again, this needs a little bit of work now that the format has developed a bit, but play 3 Lancia. The only hand trap I think that's worth playing if your deck loses to Dino at least, which this can because they want a blind second too. 3 Super Polymerization. This card is so good. This is like one of the key changes. I'm putting this in the main deck. It's too good not to play in main, especially with the Shaddolls. Then for like the back row cards, I have this is quite special, a TB2 Harpy's Feather Duster. This is one of the big hitters of the money part of the deck. And then 3 Cosmic Cyclones. Technically the Duster isn't max either. There's the Portuguese one from the game, which is like $3,000 or something. But this is pretty close at like $1,500. 1 evenly matched. And then for when you're made to go first, you want to up your consistency with the Shaddoll engine, because if you don't get to Schism when you go first, you lose. So I play 4 of the Shaddolls that give you access to your own engine, the 2 Squamata and the 2 Wendy. And yeah, that's it for the deck. Stay tuned, and I'll talk a little bit about why, if you have the money to invest in high rarity cards, it actually makes your maintenance cost of playing the game lower. So yeah, I'll have that ready for you now. Welcome back, guys. Cheers for making it this far into the video. Every video I make, I try to have a little theme to sort of make it a little bit more informative and stand out from like standard content. So besides just flexing on you guys and show you my cool Shaddoll deck, I thought I'd elaborate a little bit more on this point of keeping the maintenance cost of playing the game down, to sort of answer this pay-to-win question that I posed in the thumbnail. So every year, we of course know Konami releases new staples. These staples you sort of need to play in most relevant strategies to have a chance to compete in the metagame. And typically what happens is these staples have sort of a life cycle in terms of their value. However, if you pick really good staples, you are able to find staples that are like competitively relevant for a very long time. There's a reason Pot of Greed is still banned, for example. So if you can identify staples that you deem to be relevant for a very long time, you can actually sort of get your money's worth if you have the money to invest a little bit more heavily initially. Let's discuss the life cycle of a low rarity staple in terms of its price, what happens to it. So initially, the card is released, and initially we're going to have a fixed supply. Supply is roughly constant. This of course depends a little bit on what we mean by card release, because of course in the beginning more and more packs are being opened as the product circulates. So let's call this a few months into release, the supply is roughly constant. Furthermore, the demand also roughly constant. Typically in the beginning of a really good staples release, people won't realize how good the card is, and the demand will actually go up as the card gains popularity. But again, roughly a few months after a card's initial release, it'll have a roughly constant demand. If we draw a supply and demand curve, this is how you determine prices. When people talk about supply and demand, this is what they mean. So you have some quantity on your x-axis and some price on your y-axis. You have a supply curve, S, and you have a demand curve, D. And where these two meet, this will give you your price. Let's call that P. So this is the card's release. So what happens next in line? So typically we would get unlimited prints, which they've stopped doing now. But if they were still doing it, it would essentially have the same effect as a reprint. This happens roughly 1 year into release. The thing we need to keep in mind as well, the main asset of a stable for most players, and especially for when you have the option between low and high rarity, the main asset of a stable is its playability or functionality. And therefore, when we consider reprints, the supply, even though it's not the same card technically, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it still fulfills the same purpose in the market. So the supply now will increase, but of course the demand is still roughly about the same, assuming the card is still meta relevant. Now in terms of our supply and demand curve, this corresponds to just shifting so if this was our initial curve, roughly, this corresponds to just shifting the supply curve along the x-axis like this. So you get a new price, call it P prime, compared to our initial price, and the new price is of course lower. This is exactly what we would expect. But when we want to make this sort of comparison, we need to clearly identify the main asset. So why do people buy staples in low rarity? The main asset, as I mentioned, is playability. So players don't care whether or not the card gets reprinted because it doesn't affect the thing they actually care about with the card. But if we consider something that's high rarity instead, let's consider the life cycle of a high rarity card. High rarity stables typically are never reprinted in that same rarity. And while part of the reason people buy them is for the functionality, it is to play. Like I play with my Starlight Rares, other people play with their Starlight Rares. It is part of it, but the main asset, the thing that sort of determines its value in the market, is no longer playability. It's prestige. It's the fact that you own something that's really nice and other people will typically recognize or that you like looking at. So I guess you could also say it's prestige slash flash. I don't quite know what to call it. But the asset is no longer playability. So you don't really get affected by the reprints in the same way. So if you can invest in a high rarity stable that you know is going to be around for a while, as well as that stable growing in popularity, your card can actually increase in value over time despite numerous reprints, as opposed to decrease in value. And of course, every year there's new stables you need to invest in, and this if you want to keep playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! When I'm referring to the maintenance cost, I mean that every year, if you average it out, you're paying a set amount of money to play Yu-Gi-Oh! If you have the capital to invest, because of this difference in the asset of high rarity versus low rarity, you can actually keep your maintenance costs down as long as you sometimes sell out your stables. Or you can keep them as investments. Like I said, they won't actually decrease in value, so you'll just have an object that's worth something as opposed to an object that is decreasing in value. So that's basically the idea. If you have the money to invest into the game and buy these high rarity stables, you're not going to be affected by the problem of reprints, which is what ruins the value of most cards. Anyway, I hope that's been informative, and Propheteer, see you in the next video.